This week, we also received an important signal of support from Europe. The European Commission published a positive report on our progress toward EU membership, recognizing achievements in the area of the rule of law, the fight against corruption and the protection of minority rights. And this is the best assessment in the past 3 years. The document paves the way for further accession negotiations. And despite Hungary's blocking efforts, unexpected ideas to bypass the veto are already being discussed in Brussels so as not to halt Ukraine's progress. And this is truly important news that strengthens our footing amid the almost tectonic shifts currently shaking the United States, our main strategic ally. What is happening there? And how might it affect the situation in Ukraine? TSN's own correspondent in the United States, Olga Koshelenko, will tell us more.
This week, the United States set a new personal record. Today marks the 40th day of the government shutdown. The previous one during Trump's first term ended at 35 days. But this time things have gone too far. Republicans cannot pass the federal budget without Democratic votes, but they want to cut the Medicaid program, which is sacred to them, for the poor. Neither side is willing to compromise. As a result, the government is only partially functioning, only essential employees are going to work, but they still aren't getting paid. The consequences are already being felt not just by government employees. The funds for the food assistance program for the poor, which serves 40 million Americans, have run out. Air traffic controllers who were already overworked due to staff shortages can't handle it anymore. Hundreds of flights across the country have been cancelled or delayed. But those who are lucky enough to fly board their planes thinking that the controller hasn't been paid for a month is exhausted and angry. This doesn't directly affect Ukraine, since we no longer receive funding from the American budget. But Americans have started to lose faith in their government. This week, some states held local elections, and the Republicans lost completely. Trump wrote on Truth Social that it was because he wasn't on the ballot. It's unclear how comforting this explanation is to his fellow party members, who in exactly 1 year will be running in the midterm elections for Congress. But for the sake of self-preservation, the government will have to become more popular, meaning they'll have to look for their voters. And here's what they think, for example, about the war in Ukraine. The October survey by the Vandenberg Coalition was conducted among the core of Trump's voters, meaning those who are by default loyal to the president. The following became clear. Voters want the war in Ukraine to end. 46% believe that tougher measures are needed against Putin, tariffs, sanctions, and other forms of pressure. 76% support the sanctions imposed last month against Rosneft and Lukoil. 72% think that Ukraine should be supported more. In particular, to share intelligence data, provide Tomahawk missiles, and allow strikes deep inside Russia. After the sanctions were imposed against Rosneft and Lukoil, Trump generally seems to be trying to distance himself from the topic of the war in Ukraine, which has not brought him quick or positive results. At first, he advised waiting 6 months for the effects of the oil sanctions, but now he says they are already evident.
I can say that exports from Russia have significantly decreased. We just want to see the war end. So many people have been killed. Many Russian soldiers have been killed, so I think at some point they will wise up and do it. So yes, Russian exports have dropped significantly.
Meanwhile, Trump and Putin are playing a game of nuclear blackmail together, but no one really wants to do it for real. At first, Putin was boasting about his Burevestniks and Poseidons. Trump, unlike Biden, who took every hint of nuclear war seriously, responded with a counter-escalation and announced that he would also conduct nuclear tests. Experts became interested in what exactly also meant. After all, neither Russia nor China has tested nuclear weapons in the last 30 years. Contrary to other American officials, Trump insists that no, competitors are conducting secret tests.
Russia is testing and China is testing, but they don't talk about it. You know, we are an open society, we are different, we talk about it. We have to talk about it, because otherwise you'll start writing about it. They don't have reporters who would write about it. We do.
In response, Putin held a meeting of the country's Security Council in the style of a provincial surf theater from the Russian hinterland. The topic of the meeting was transportation security, but the Speaker of the State Duma, Volodin, boldly interrupts Putin and spontaneously proposes to discuss nuclear tests in response to similar statements from the Americans. And the Minister of Defense Belousov just happens to have a report on this topic with him, even though, as a reminder, he was supposed to attend a meeting about transportation security. By the way, no one mentioned transportation again.
I consider it appropriate to begin preparations for large-scale nuclear tests immediately.
The outcome is basically nothing. Putin instructed to study the feasibility of the issue, but observers' attention is drawn to something else. There is no foreign minister among the members of the Russian Security Council. Sergei Lavrov, according to the Financial Times, fell out of favor after he ruined a conversation with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He spoke on the phone in such a way that the American secretary reported to Trump that it was not possible to meet with Putin at this time. There's no point.
Officials were struck by Lavrov's stubbornness. Lavrov is openly tired and it seems believes he has more important things to do than to meet and interact with the United States, regardless of what President Putin wants, said a source familiar with the situation.
According to the media, the Kremlin did not instruct Lavrov to do this. The minister has disappeared. He won't even attend the G20 summit later this month. Whether Putin intends to remove the man who has led Russian diplomacy for more than 2 decades or has simply hidden the minister temporarily to send a signal to the Americans remains unknown. But this week, the role of Russian negotiator was played by a completely different actor. Actually, a meeting between Putin and Trump in Budapest would have suited Viktor Orban much better. But since the Russians ruined everything, he went to Washington himself. The thing is, there will be elections in Hungary next March. The opposition party TISA is slightly ahead of the ruling Fidesz, and he needs some PR. Trump welcomed his friend at the highest level. He greeted him on the steps of the West Wing, and during the working lunch, instead of seating him across the table as protocol dictates, he sat him right next to himself. From this angle, the cameras had a clear view of how, throughout the entire public part of the event, Orban kept his hand in an as-yet empty plate. The US president says directly that the leader of Hungary is so outstanding that he must win next year's election. And he gives him a truly valuable gift, a 1-year exemption from sanctions on Russian oil and gas. No one else in the world is allowed to buy it, only Orban and...
We are considering this because it is difficult for him to get oil and gas from other places. It's a wonderful country, a great country, but they have no sea, no ports, and so they have a difficult problem. And if you look at what's happening in Europe, many countries there don't have such problems, and they buy a lot of oil and gas from Russia. As they know, this really worries me, because we are helping them, and yet they are buying oil and gas from Russia. So this issue could perhaps be considered more carefully.
Orban says he also wants to discuss the war with Trump. Supposedly, only the two of them truly stand for peace. And the entire European Union mistakenly believes that Ukraine can win?
The only government that stands for peace is the government of the United States and little Hungary in Europe. Everyone else wants to continue the war because many of them believe that Ukraine can win on the battlefield, which is a misunderstanding of the situation. So it's a complicated issue, and we will discuss it.
So you're saying that Ukraine cannot win this war?
Miracles do happen.
What message from Putin Orban conveyed to Trump after the press left remains a mystery. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that nothing agreed upon without Ukraine will matter.
He will tell him that Putin wants to end the war because in the Prime Minister's rhetoric is no different from the Russian one. He will say that Ukraine is losing the war because his rhetoric is no different from the Russian one. It's like, I would say, a live mail service from Russia to the United States.
However, the obvious crisis of Russian diplomacy cannot help but be pleasing, as long as it is represented by people like Lavrov, who is no longer able to hide his arrogance at international negotiations, or his opposite, Dmitriev. Just by appearing on American TV channels, he irritated the Trump administration. There is hope. From Washington, United States, Olga Koshelenko, Maxim Shinkarenko, TSN Week, 1+1, Marathon, United News.